Hi, I'm Gary Kim with Spectrum Futures, and I'm here today with Hyacinth Nwana. Everyone calls him H, however, so you will hear me call him H. Don't be surprised. He's the head of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. And H, why don't you tell us a little bit about DSA?
The DSA stands for Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. We lobby for three core things across the world. We try and encourage bridging the digital divide, which is a massive problem worldwide, as everybody knows. We try and lobby for rules and regulations that would allow for more dynamic use of spectrum. And last but by no means least, we also lobby for the Internet of Things.
Now, by dynamic, what do we mean by that?
It's a really important question. By dynamic, we mean most spectrum allocation and assignment today happens on a static basis. The whole idea of being dynamic means you can either use spectrum in terms of time, in terms of frequency at some particular locations, and also in terms of different modulation type techniques that we use dynamically. So the classic way dynamic spectrum access would typically work is we would have access to some particular database which shows the unused frequencies at that part of the world, or that part of the country, or that part of the continent, which are not being used at that particular time. And then a device will speak to the database and say which frequency is not being used at this moment in time. And then the database says, here you go, you can use this particular frequency. And then the device goes on to use that particular frequency pretty dynamically.
So at a very high level, sort of a shift from command and control assignment to flexible.
It's an absolute shift from command and control to dynamic, flexible, and most importantly, sharing. It means you get to share spectrum which has notionally been allocated to broadcasting or to the military, which is not being used at particular locations or at particular times, can now suddenly be used on a secondary basis by other users without interfering with the primary user. And that's the whole key notion of dynamic spectrum access. The whole idea that a secondary user can have access to that particular spectrum landscape without interfering with the primary user, and hence you drive up the productivity of that spectrum.
Yeah, so effectively what we're doing is increasing the amount of spectrum we can use for communications.
Absolutely,
right?
You increase the amount of spectrum in communication in use, because I usually say this across the world, something like 90% of spectrum is not being used in 90% of the places, 90% of the time. Now that's an incredible waste of a really significant resource for the building of economies all around the world. And so dynamic spectrum access helps to start alleviating that problem.
Now, I know initially this has been talked about largely in context of TV white spaces, yes, but it's not limited to TV white spaces.
Absolutely not. TV white space, as you know, Gary, I came from Ofcom, where I run spectrum policy in the United Kingdom. One of the reasons we chose the TV bands was because that spectrum is so invaluable because of its propagation characteristics. It goes literally 20 kilometers in some cases, depending on the powers you use. But because we also knew it was going to provide some very big difficulties with the broadcasters. So we really wanted to show that if sharing happens in the TV bands, then there's absolutely no reason why it should not be able to happen in many other bands across the landscape. So we started in the TV bands, and the regulations which enable spectrum sharing in the TV bands are called TV white space regulations. But I even announced when I was still in Ofcom that we'll also be looking at radio bands, and we'll be looking at much higher frequency bands as well, in order to encourage such sharing.
Sort of 3.5 in the US,
3.5 in the US, 2.3, 2.4 in Europe, even the Wi-Fi bands, practically every band can be shared.
Mm-hmm. How about 5 gig?
Above 5 gigs at this moment in time, we've not started doing that. Those can be shared on a geographical basis, but we have not really started doing a lot of sharing regulations above 5 gigahertz frequencies so far.
Good. Well, H, our time has been much too short, but thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. And thank you very much.
And thanks for watching PTC TV.